There is a passage by Rumi گر در طلب لقمه نانی نانی گر در طلب گوهر کانی کانی, that if it is bread that you desire, you're bread. If it's a car that you desire, you're a car. And I think when you walk out, and if there is anything that becomes attractive to any one of your senses, you pursue them, you dream about them, you fantasize about them. They kind of make you in their image. It's like you go home, you go to Yahoo, there's an image of Kim Kardashian, and you say, oh, well, I like this part of her, and I like that part of her. And all of a sudden you realize, well, you may be a Jew, but you're not really creating the image of God. Right now at 10 o'clock at night, you're just made in the image of Kim Kardashian because she's inspiring all these desires about you. And I think what Hussein and any teacher does, and any piece of advertisement does, once they find the space inside you, and once they are nourished in some fashion where they blossom, they begin to create an image of themselves inside you. You want to be like them. You want to emulate them in all sorts of different ways. The only difference is this. See, you may enjoy these ideas, but let's say your work is not teaching, and let's say your companion doesn't like to engage in these conversations, and let's just say you're a parent of a 2-year-old who every time you want to have a serious conversation or think about things that are meaningful for you, they begin to cry and whine, and you have to take them to some stupid place to buy them some stupid toy to just shut them up. And so whatever you were focused on, if you had read a passage like Abu Sa'id Abu Khair, and all of a sudden that passage was giving a birth to an image of you that you enjoyed, that you wanted to make certain sacrifices, you wanted to read the Bible or the Quran, or maybe dialogues are played in a certain way, have conversations. And if that was your focus, all of a sudden another desire comes forth. And then now you have two desires that are very much in conflict with one another in all sorts of different ways. And then whichever desire gets nourished, well, that desire wins. What had happened with Hussein was that, at least for me, I would see him 2-3 times a week. Then I would find myself in the presence of the books that promoted, encouraged his ideas. I was really never left alone. It doesn't mean that I didn't get distracted, and it doesn't mean that I didn't do things that could be categorized as a little naughty, But for the most part, I think being around Hussein gave birth to a good amount of inspiration. But it wasn't all positive. It's not inspiring when, he was 35, 36. I was maybe 19. A 19-year-old wants to go out there and have fun. You want to get married. You want to have fun. You want to, take your wife or your husband or your kids somewhere and have a good time with them. But then what happens is you run into this 40-year-old man, for example, who has had his fun. Then his fun all of a sudden changed into something a bit more serious. And then he's looking, like a predator, he's looking for someone he can capture. And he did. And what happens when you capture a 19-year-old who's got no life, who's confused? Well, they're a great candidate to be brainwashed. And so he inspired an image inside me. I want to be that guy in a well, hanging upside down, overcoming the pains and the desires of my body. To read the passages or to hold the sacred text, because when I look at it, it's a sacred text. That itself is like a beautiful totem. It's something that you look at and you know that the presence of God lives in it. And then you open it, God kind of comes out, and then you read the passages and you're inspired. Who wouldn't want that? I can't say who, but it's a beautiful set of images to have, But you run into a great amount of failures. We talk about, and I'm talking as a 60-year-old man almost. The first maybe 15 years or so, it was a horrifying place to be because you have access to nothing. Nothing works. All the relationships you touch, you enter into, they fall apart. There is this arrogance about you. And it's not an arrogance because you know. It's an arrogance that, it's based on some knowing that nothing is going to work. It's like you give birth, but your child has like physical issues, serious physical health issues. Hussein gives birth, but you're talking about things that you can't see, you can't touch, you have no power over. And, you're happy for a few hours and you're miserable for like 6 or 7 days. And it's not the best way to live life. You make yourself miserable. And if you have parents and those parents are close to you, near you, you ruin them. You make them miserable. And like all good parents, they want to kind of come down and help you out, but you're just so unreachable. And you're always unreachable to your companion. So when, you ask your question, there is this stage of birth, and there is a stage of infancy, and then the stage of youth, and there is a stage of adulthood. And then you become slightly ripe. You begin to understand a little bit. You become a bit more mature. And then you can go back in time and say, I really like the part that Hussein created because it has been nourished relatively the right way for the past like 35, 40 years. And not everything is perfect, but 60% of it is good. 40% of it still needs work. But 60% is not bad. Even if you have 50%, even if you have 40%. If you can walk into a classroom and feel yourself come to life for 2 hours, those 2 hours will sustain you for the remainder of the day. And what happens when you have an image that has blossomed into maturity is that it really becomes the sun of your life, of who you are. Everything revolves around it. If, for example, you want to go home and have a conversation with your companion, it needs to revolve around something philosophical and reflective. If you have children and you want to send them to school, that particular space needs to kind of inspire their reflective abilities. And every time your daughter or your son or whomever comes home, or even if you're a companion, you have a conversation, and all of a sudden you catch yourself, because the conversation you're having is relatively cheap, you kind of doubt everything. You want to kind of just change the flow of the conversation. You want to nourish it in a different way. And it makes things difficult until your companion comes to realize this is a part of you that he or she will never reach. That part of you needs to be left alone, But you are reachable in these other areas. It's not enough to inspire an image inside someone, but that person is not ripe enough yet, and then they go away. What happens is not only are they inwardly in conflict, whoever they bring into their life also falls in that conflict. And their conflict becomes not only with themselves but also with the other person. Now they have two difficulties. That the emotions that live inside them, that the emotions created by their companion, it's just too much. You have this part of you being inspired that does poetry, that does reading, that does good, meaningful conversations that have depth. But it's not nourished, it's not protected. It doesn't live in a gated community. So all sorts of trash gets in. And so what happens is, when it remains unprotected, as you walk around, you do your life, once in a while, you are confronted with a piece of advertisement that, oh yes, this part of me used to enjoy A, B, C, D. And the moment you're triggered, everything falls apart and you get really sad and depressed. And you turn your life upside down and you go home and you're mean and nasty to your companion. And he or she doesn't really know what the hell just happened. But it's out of your reach, it's out of your control. So, Mehrdad would come to the gathering. Don't get me wrong, he's a really, really nice guy, and I'm sure he's doing really well. But his companion complained, his kids complained, and that part of him couldn't stay alive for too long. It had to be socialized within the context of a family life and working for a state. And Hussein was the same way, He had this, he still is very kind. And because I think for the most part, because of his kindness, he couldn't walk away from the relationship, even though he knew it was toxic. And so he had to make a choice. Does he want to pursue this, part of him, or does he want to pursue this particular relationship that would eventually, poison every part of him, and eventually, decided to kind of let go of this. Despite all the things that I've said, some of it is science. Part of all of this stuff really is chance, is luck, is magic, is fate. I don't really know. It's not very difficult to inspire. And it's not really very difficult to protect what you have inspired. You just don't know if it's ever going to reach a stage where that infant will be able to walk or talk or run or become independent or autonomous. I can't remember very many times where we asked questions that had to do with our future. That am I going to be okay? Am I going to be good in the classroom? Am I ever going to get married? Will ever anybody out there like me enough to just hang out with me? And despite Mehrdad and Hussein having a relatively rich physical life, I don't think I've ever heard, I don't remember them ever asking such questions. And I say that because I just enjoyed being there and having conversations and listening to this man talk. I think if Mehrdad didn't have children, he would never get married. He would have probably walked out. But, if you have something inside you that have roots deep within, and those roots create attachment, they create love, fear, guilt if you walk away, with that you have shame. And so whatever part that is inspired inside you, those other parts of you that are attached, they will crush this new part. You won't survive it. It's impossible. And to be fair, I think I was way too young. And in my youth, I could not possibly understood the anxiety that was living inside Mehrdad and Hussein. It's a great question that you ask. Part of the difficulty with all of this is, you usually encounter people who have a past and who are in a relationship. It's one thing when you're young and you get yourself into this stuff. And then you begin to choose your companion very, very carefully. I want someone who reads, who does poetry. So that, there are going to be these spaces where the two of you meet. And this part of you can be nourished. The more this part of you grows, the more it wants to occupy more space inside your body. But there is also this other stuff. People come here, for example, in good faith, or wherever they like to go. And what usually happens is there is this life, there is also this other life, and both lives are good. The problem is they're not in harmony. They can't, the lion and the lamb can't lay together in peace and be okay, you know. So you want to say yes to the gathering, but you say, well, maybe I should just wait another couple of days just to see how I feel. Maybe I can just say, no, I have a cold, I can't make it. So you can just hang on to what you have. Then you look at what you have and you say, well, this is good, but I also want this. And so both lives begin to suffer, you know, because of these parts. And then a lot of time need to pass. And hopefully this still intact. Hopefully this is still intact. And after 5 or 10 or 15 years, your companion says, okay, so it seems like he or she is reading. I'll just leave them alone. And so when you're done reading and you go out, they say, okay, you won't have an omelet. Because that's not going to be the case for the first like 5 or 6 or 10 years. You're reading, the companion says, well, I guess they don't really love me that much, you know, or they don't like me that much. You say, well, if that's the case, why are they with me? So there's all this like internal dialogue that's taking place. It really, 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 really is very much like raising a child. It doesn't matter how old someone is when they come to you and they say, I really like your class. And they come and sit. And they sit some more, and then they sit some more. And all of a sudden, there is this brand new part inside them. And what do kids do? From the moment of birth, they begin to scream. And this part of you that's just born, it does the same thing. It screams at everything, you know, because it wants everything to be as inspiring as, let's just say, the classroom. But you go to work, it's boring, so you scream in your own way, you know. You go home and there's your companion, you want to have the same sort of dialogue with your companion, but he or she is just an idiot, at least that particular moment. And so you scream, and the way you scream is that, I'm just going to go for a walk. I just don't want to be around you, you know. And so whoever has inspired this part of you, it really is kind of like babysitting for a long, long, long time. And then you trust it enough to say, okay, you can cross the street now. You can read this book. You can have this thought. You can feel this emotion. You can have this conversation. You know, all the things that you read in these books, you know, plant a seed and whatever. It is such nonsense. It's not like that. I just don't go to Home Depot just to buy seeds. And I don't just dig the ground, you know, and put the seeds in there and cover it up and never give it water. What the hell good is that? To just watch it die, you know? So whenever someone plants anything, whenever someone invests in anything that they find to be valuable, they're always looking for, you know, some result. There is expectation. You know, the idea of don't expect anything. I don't think people really understand what it is that they're talking about. You know, they say, well, expectation is a result of thought and all that nonsense. And to some extent, it may be true. You know, I mean, it's really like two hands washing one another. You come here for something. And when you come here, I also want something. You know, you can't just read the teachers of Gurdjieff and all of a sudden talk about what you're doing on Canvas for your Humanities 20A class. It doesn't work that way. If you have read a book, it should have created some feelings or emotions, some thought process. Then when you open your mouth to have a conversation, it needs to be revolving around the things that you have read. Otherwise, it's just a complete waste. Why even engage in those things? The other Hussein, sometimes he would just be so tired, he would go to work at like 6 till about 5, go home, take care of his wife and his kid, then go to the gathering. And as Hussein was, whether it was like doing poetry or the Quran, Hussein would get a little sleepy, then he would yawn a little, or then Hussein would say, Hussein, go to the bathroom, wash your face, wake yourself up, come back and sit. And then he would do that. He would come back and, I mean, there was me, there was Mehdad, but Hussein had a very interesting relationship with Hussein. He wanted Hussein to be there. It's like every time Hussein yawned or kind of just his eyes would close, it's like this part of Hussein, this other Hussein, would just shatter as if his image is getting lost. He can no longer see himself in Hussein. So all this rambling really is, it takes a lot of work to inspire an image, to protect the image so that the other person becomes interested. Like, I no longer need to tell you to go to the library and get a book to read. You just do that on your own. You know, you can cross the street, you can do all that stuff yourself. But, you know, it took some years. That's how all things are.